G7's top diplomats discuss Gaza conflict. United Nations pushes for global financial system reform. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. This is World Today. I'm Brenda Lepal. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on the G7 to speak in a clear voice about the Israel-Hamas war as he kicked off talks with fellow foreign ministers from grouping in Japan. Arriving in Tokyo following his latest whirlwind tour of West Asia, Blinken was set to brief his counterparts on his trip and progress on delivering humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza and efforts to contain the conflict. France was the only G7 member to vote in favour of a UN General Assembly resolution last month, seeking an immediate humanitarian truce. The United States voted against it, while Japan, Britain, Italy, Germany and Canada all abstained. France said in a statement announcing Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna's attendance in Tokyo that the G7 would discuss the need to respond to the requirements of civilian populations in Gaza and to respect international humanitarian law. Japanese counterpart Yoko Kamikawa said at the start of a working dinner devoted to the Gaza situation that she wanted a candid and deep discussion. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there would be no fuel delivered to Gaza and no ceasefire in Israel's fighting with Hamas unless the more than 240 hostages seized by the Hamas group are freed. Since 7 October, Israel has relentlessly hammered Gaza with more than 12,000 air and artillery strikes and sent in ground forces that have effectively cut it in half. The Israeli campaign in the Gaza Strip has killed more than 10,300 people, mostly civilians. The World Health Organization meanwhile said an average of 160 children are killed every day in Gaza by the war, reiterating the urgent need for a humanitarian pause to ease the suffering. WHO spokesman Christian Lindmeier said the level of death and suffering is hard to fathom, as the people in Gaza are dying in their thousands. The International Committee of the Red Cross also demanded an end to the suffering of civilians, especially children. It said children have been killed, wounded or ripped from their families, and the situation is a moral failing. The European Union sent an 8th flight of humanitarian aid to Gaza as Commissioner Janez Lenarčič promised more support. He also emphasized that access was key to it reaching the most vulnerable. The flight of mostly medical supplies from Belgium's Ostende airport was loaded on Tuesday morning and was due to leave for Egypt.
8 flights are the first batch. There will be further flights in the coming weeks, and of course we'll continue this as long as necessary. There is emergency, humanitarian emergency in the Gaza Strip. There is shortage of everything, of water, of food, of medicines, medical equipment, of fuel, and we need to use every tool available that we have in order to provide this necessary assistance.
He said he was confident they will reach Gaza's civilian population. The UN Humanitarian Office said Gaza services are close to breaking point without fuel supplies. Gaza's Interior Ministry said all bakeries in northern Gaza are out of service due to Israeli attacks and lack of fuel. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and his counterpart from Burkina Faso, Kasum Koulibaly, met on Tuesday and agreed to strengthen defense ties. Burkina's military rulers have deepened cooperation with Moscow as the country looks to diversify its international allies following a coup last year. Russia in recent months has discussed greater military cooperation with Burkina Faso. Moscow has also pledged to deliver free grain to the African country, which is one of the world's poorest. Shoigu said according to the ministry, Russian-Burkinabe relations are based solely on the principles of mutual respect and consideration of each other's interests. The ministry published footage of Shoigu and Koulibaly shaking hands and holding a roundtable meeting with officials. Since coming to power in September last year, the ruling junta has distanced itself from France, its historic partner and former colonial power, and moved closer to Russia. In October, Burkina Faso signed a deal with Russia for the construction of a nuclear power plant to increase the energy supply to the Sahel country, where less than a quarter of the population has access to electricity. The United Nations has called for a significant overhaul of the global financial system to help the world's poorest countries and their struggle to fill enormous financial gaps. The United Nations Conference on Trade, Investment and Development said the least developed countries are in a desperate situation, warning that they stand on the precipice of a fiscal abyss. It also said the countries currently face an overwhelming $100 billion annual funding gap to meet their Sustainable Development Goals transition needs. While the countries need to do more to mobilize domestic resources, the UN agency stressed that they would need an important amount of the resources from overseas, cautioning that the existing international financial system was ill-equipped to help. The UN agency stressed that the main decision-making processes concerning institutions, rules and procedures that govern international finance generally do not sufficiently take into account the interests of the least developed countries. The poorest nations, with a combined population of 1 billion people, account for just 4% of the voting rights of the World Bank, and they receive less than 2.5% of the general allocation of the IMF's special drawing rights, a type of reserve currency. If distribution was done by population, they would receive more than 12%. The International Monetary Fund raised its 2023 economic growth forecast for China, citing stronger consumption and recent policy measures announced by Beijing. The fund said it saw gross domestic product expanding 5.4% this year, compared with a previous estimate of 5%, while it lifted its 2024 outlook to 4.6% from 4.2%. The economy grew 4.9% in July to September, slower than the previous quarter, but a lot better than expected and a little shy of the government's goal of around 5% for the year, one of its lowest targets in years. China's economy expanded just 3% last year, well below the official target of 5.5%, as it was choked by draconian COVID-19 measures. A string of below-par economic data in the first half, which came despite the lifting of zero-COVID curbs at the end of last year, led the government to unveil the number of targeted stimulus measures aimed at supporting key sectors, particularly the troubled property industry. The country's key real estate sector generally accounts for around a quarter of GDP, but the industry has lurched from one crisis to another in recent years, with major firms crippled by mountains of debt. Portuguese Prime Minister António Costa announced his resignation after he was embroiled in a corruption investigation into the awarding of energy-related contracts. According to a statement from public prosecutors, the probe involving Costa and others covers alleged misuse of funds, active and passive corruption by political figures, and influence peddling. Costa will also be investigated independently for allegedly intervening personally to speed up the awarding of licenses for lithium exploration and hydrogen production. Portugal's head of state, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, accepted Costa's resignation and called for a meeting of parliamentary parties on Wednesday with the aim of organizing an early election. Before he can dissolve parliament and call early elections, the president must also convene the Council of State, which includes the country's most senior politicians, former presidents and other notable figures. Costa, from Portugal's Socialist Party, has been Prime Minister since late 2015 and was re-elected in January last year. His popularity, however, has recently declined after a series of scandals. Coming up next, 14 Venezuelan migrants killed in Chile fire. Stay with us. A fire in an informal immigrant neighborhood in the southern Chilean city of Coronel left 14 dead, most of them children. The city's chief prosecutor, Hugo Cuevas, said the victims appear to be undocumented Venezuelan immigrants. Residents of the area, a working-class neighborhood lined with dirt roads and tin-roofed houses, gathered to watch as investigators poured in and out of the home where the fire broke out. Officials are still confirming the victims' identities and determining the cause of the incident. Preliminary reports indicated the wooden house was quickly engulfed after fire from a handmade stove spread. A deputy mayor of Coronel, Javier Valencia, lamented the recent increase in construction of housing on unauthorized lands, known in Chile as encampments, where forest fires have become more common. Coronel, a little south of Concepcion, Chile's second most populous city, is one of the areas most affected by such fires due to the high temperatures of the southern hemisphere's summer. Since 2017, Venezuelan migrant arrivals to Chile have increased exponentially. According to official estimates, of the 1.7 million foreigners who arrived in Chile in recent years, almost half are Venezuelans who fled the economic crisis in their country. Flooding has hit dozens of towns in northern France, leaving roads sometimes only passable in boats and dozens of schools closed. Two rivers, the Ar and the Lian, were placed on red alert for flooding in the northern Pas-de-Calais department after heavy showers overnight from Monday to Tuesday. The red alert warning will remain in place until Wednesday evening. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said that 7 people were injured but did not provide further details. He also said that more than 1,500 firefighters were mobilized in the region. Coming on the heels of Storm Karen, which battered Western Europe last week, the prefecture said the floods impacted around 60 municipalities, causing significant damage, adding that dozens of schools have been closed. Vigicru, the official river flooding watchdog, described Tuesday's floods as exceptional. India's Supreme Court ordered authorities in the states surrounding New Delhi to stop farmers burning crop residue as the air quality from smog engulfing the world's most polluted capital during the past week reached hazardous levels. The court has issued similar orders in the past years with limited effects as state authorities report inability to control the burning, despite fines and sometimes due to farmers' hostility towards officials. Supreme Court Judge Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul made the local police station in charge responsible for ensuring that the court's directions are followed, under supervision of the state's chief secretary. Delhi has stopped local construction, closed primary schools till the 10th of November, and will impose restrictions on use of vehicles next week to fight pollution, but it wants its neighboring states to control crop residue burning. Farmers in Punjab and Haryana usually burn crop stubble left behind after rice is harvested in late October or early November to quickly clear their fields before planting wheat crops. The practice has been followed for years, and according to federal government's air quality monitoring agency, SAHIH, the resultant smoke has typically accounted for 30% to 40% of Delhi's October to November pollution. Bangladesh raised the minimum monthly pay for the country's 4 million government workers by 56.25%, a decision immediately rejected by unions, seeking a near tripling of the figure. The minimum wage is fixed by a state-appointed board that includes representatives from the manufacturers, unions and wage experts. The board secretary, Raisha Afros, said the new minimum monthly wage for garment factory workers has been fixed at $113. The figure was immediately rejected by unions, which have been demanding a $208 minimum. Unions said their members have been hard hit by persistent inflation, which in October reached nearly 10%, and a cost of living crisis partly triggered by the taka depreciating about 30% against the US dollar since early last year. The South Asian country's 3,500 garment factories account for around 85% of its $55 billion in annual exports, supplying many of the world's top fashion names, including Levi's, Zara and H&M. But conditions are dire for many of the sector's workers, the vast majority of whom are women. Mostly monthly pay starts at $75. Workers have gone on strike to demand a near tripling of their wages, with violent scenes in recent days, while employers offered 25%. Workers at 4 Swedish ports blocked the loading and unloading of Tesla cars in a growing strike movement over the US company's refusal to sign a collective wage agreement with mechanics. According to trade union IF Metall, some 130 mechanics at 10 Tesla workshops in 7 cities across Sweden first stepped off the job on 27 October, according to trade union IF Metall. Negotiated sector by sector, collective agreements are the basis of the Swedish labour market model, covering almost 90% of all Swedish employees and guaranteeing standard wages and working conditions. On Monday, the union said meetings with Tesla had resulted in a stalemate and accused Tesla of using systematically strike breakers to circumvent the strike. Tesla founder and chief Elon Musk has consistently rejected calls to allow the company's 127,000 employees worldwide to unionize. Swedish news agency TT reported that impact of the strike was limited so far, as work continued on several of Tesla's service centers and shipments of Tesla cars had been rerouted in anticipation of the port strike. The conservative U.S. Supreme Court has an opportunity to clarify its latest case law on the right to bear arms, which has caused confusion in American courts, though it remains to be seen whether it will seize it. 2 weeks after a mass shooter left 18 people dead in the northeastern state of Maine. The court is addressing the particularly sensitive issue of gun rights following a controversial ruling in June last year. The justices will be asked to weigh the Constitution's Second Amendment right to bear arms against a law designed to protect victims of domestic abuse. In the 2022 decision carried by the 6 conservative justices against their 3 liberal colleagues, Justice Clarence Thomas explained that the court would henceforth authorize only reasonable exceptions to the Second Amendment, notably in sensitive places. Because of the ruling, lower courts across the country have had to determine whether gun restrictions before them are consistent with precedents in the history and traditions of the United States from the late 18th to the 19th century. On the basis of that new case law, an ultra-conservative federal appeals court ruled in March that a federal law banning gun ownership by people with domestic violence restraining orders was unconstitutional for lack of historical precedent. And in other news, the first images from Europe's Euclid Space Telescope were released, showing a nebula resembling a horse's head, never before seen distant galaxies, and even circumstantial evidence of elusive dark matter. Euclid blasted off in July on the world's first ever mission, aiming to investigate the enduring cosmic mysteries of dark matter and dark energy. After joining fellow space telescope James Webb at a stable hovering spot around 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, Euclid started sending back its first observations. The exquisite images include a majestic shot of the nearby Horsehead Nebula, as well as spiral and irregular galaxies. But one of Euclid project scientists said that most exciting for the team was the image of the Perseus cluster, a distant collection of more than 1,000 galaxies. Euclid's early images have also already pointed towards circumstantial evidence of dark matter. For example, the scientists said it was surprising that Euclid did not spot stars trailing globular cluster NGC 6397, a collection of hundreds of thousands of stars. One of the theories is that there might be dark matter around the globular cluster, which keeps all the stars together. And in sports, sweet revenge for JDT with victory over Ulsan Hyundai. Stay with us. Johor Darul Tazim JDT defeated South Koreans giants Ulsan Hyundai FC 2-1 in their fourth Group I action of the Asian Champions League ACL at the Sultan Ibrahim Stadium in Johor last night. Both teams played good attacking football in the first half, but JDT drew first blood in the 44th minute through Heberty the Andrade shot from outside the penalty box and taking the lead into the break. Two-time ACL champions Ulsan Hyundai restored parity in the 69th minute when Ataru Esaka scored from a Valery Kaizashvili cross. But it was Muhammad Akia Rashid who emerged as the hero when he scored in the 86th minute, courtesy of a cross from Arif Aiman Hanapi. The victory saw the Southern Tigers exact sweet revenge against Hong Myong-bo's men, to whom they lost 3-1 at the Ulsan Munsu Football Stadium in Ulsan, South Korea on 24th October. JDT are currently third in Group I with 6 points, tied with Ulsan Hyundai, who are only ahead on goal difference. The group is led by Japanese club Kawasaki Frontale with 12 points, while Thai club PG Pathum United sit at the bottom without any points. And in European football, Atletico Madrid's Antoine Griezmann and Alvaro Morata both struck twice to help thrash Celtic 6-0 in the Champions League, sending the Spaniards top in Group E. Atletico made a strong start and Griezmann opened the scoring in the 6th minute, slotting in a low shot from the edge of the box. In at a time before the break, Griezmann found Jose Maria Jimenez with a brilliant cross from the right touchline to the far corner, and he headed it to Spain captain Morata to tap in. Player of the match, Griezmann then scored the third with an acrobatic volley in the 60th minute, and substitute Samuel Lino netted for the fourth with a fine curling strike into the top left corner. 6 minutes later, Morata blasted home an unstoppable strike from a rebound in the 76th minute, and Saul Niguez wrapped up the scoring from close range in the 85th minute. Atletico went top in Group E on 8 points with 2 games remaining, 1 point ahead of second place Lazio, who beat Feyenoord 1-0. The Dutch side are third on 6 points, with Celtic bottom on 1 point. And elsewhere, AC Milan striker Olivier Giroud's powerful header early in the second half secured a 2-1 Group F home victory over Paris Saint-Germain in a pulsating match for the first win in this season's competition by the Italian side. PSG went ahead after 9 minutes following a well-worked corner. Marquinhos flicked on the set piece and Milan Skriniar was left on mark to hit home his first goal for the Paris club. They have scored in the last 48 group stage matches in Champions League, their longest run in the competition's history, having previously drawn a blank against Real Madrid in 2015. But the home side were level 3 minutes later with an excellent finish from Rafael Leao. Giroud's initial shot was saved by Gianluigi Donnarumma against his former club, but as the ball looped into the air, Leao produced an overhead kick. Kylian Mbappe then found himself one-on-one with Milan goalkeeper Mike Mignon, but scuffed his shot wide before Ousmane Dembele struck the crossbar with a curling shot from 25 meters. There was less goal-mouth action in the second period, but Milan led early when Theo Hernandez's superb cross was met with a powerful trademark header by Giroud. Lee Kang-in struck a post for PSG on a luckless night for the Parisians as their 5-game winning run came to an end. Meanwhile, Danilo Sican's starring header gave Shakhtar Donetsk a 1-0 win against La Liga champions Barcelona in their Champions League Group H clash. The 22-year-old forward gave the Ukrainian side, playing in Hamburg, a shock lead in the 40th minute against the 5-time European champions who dominated possession throughout the match. Sican jumped behind defender Andres Christensen to meet a Georgi Gocholeshvili cross from the right touchline and knocked the ball just out of reach of goalkeeper Marc-Andre ter Stegen in the Barca goal. Barcelona could have booked their last 16 ticket with a win over Shakhtar, but instead, the Ukrainian club kept their own hopes alive with the famous victory in Hamburg. In another Group H clash, FC Porto stayed on course for a place in the Champions League last 16 with a 2-0 home victory over 10-man Royal Antwerp thanks to Ivan Nilsson's first-half penalty and veteran Pepe's late header. Brazilian Ivan Nilsson, who had netted a hat-trick when Porto beat the Belgians 4-1 away in the previous Champions League clash last month, tucked away a 32nd minute penalty after a clumsy foul by Girano Kirk on Steven Estaquio. Porto dominated the game after Antwerp midfielder Jurgen Ekkelenkamp was sent off 7 minutes into the second half. However, despite their numerical superiority, Porto had to wait until 1 minute into stoppage time for the second goal, headed home by the 40-year-old Pepe. The result sees Porto move level on 9 points with leaders Barcelona, with both sides 3 points ahead of Shakhtar Donetsk, who stunned the Catalans in an early game. Antwerp's fourth successive defeat means they have no chance of a top 2 finish, even with 2 matches left to play. And in tennis, Ugo Humbert thrilled a home crowd as he battled past Austria's Dominic Thiem 7-6, 4-6, 6-3 to reach the quarterfinals in Metz, and his fourth tour-level quarterfinal since October. The Frenchman hit 11 aces past the Austrian former world number 3 and saved 4 of the 6 break points he faced. Humbert won 84% of his first serve points to advance after 2 hours and 42 minutes, setting a last 8 clash with qualifier and countryman Harold Mayo. The 25-year-old Humbert has been in strong form in recent weeks, reaching the semi-finals in Basel and the quarterfinals in Shanghai and Beijing. He is chasing his first tour-level trophy of 2023 in Metz. In other action, number 3 seed Karen Khachanov of Russia also advanced to the quarters with a 6-4, 6-4 win over yet another French player, Constant Lechtian. Khachanov reached a personal best 10 tour-level quarterfinal of the season, downing Lochon in 1 hour and 28 minutes. The third seed, who holds a 14-5 record in opening round matches this year, arrived in Metz off the back of a run to the quarterfinals in Paris. Khachanov is seeking his second title of the season after triumphing in Zhuhai and will next play Matej Valkus or Alexander Shevchenko.
Jeu, 7 match. Karen Khachanov, dommage 0-6.
And that wraps up World Today in our top story. G7 top diplomats discuss Gaza conflict. Tune in to Malaysia Tonight, coming up at 8:30 p.m. on TV1 and saluran Berita RTM. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I'm Brandon Lepal, Malaysia Madani, Tegak Perpaduan, Penuhi Harapan. Thank you for watching. Take care.